Welcome, everybody. This is the webinar on spirituality and quitting, how identifying as a spiritual person can transform your quit journey. And we're very lucky to have with us here today Dr. McFadden from the Mayo Clinic. And he has done some amazing work and research on the connection between spiritual belief and addiction and quitting. And so we're looking forward to having a conversation today. I am happy to turn over the facilitation baton to Danielle Scruggs, who is with our X community team. Danielle and I work together, moderating the X community, making it a welcoming and safe place for all who are on a quit journey for either tobacco products or vaping products. And if you're not a part of that community and you would like to join, I will be putting a link in the chat throughout the conversation here today. If you'd like to join, there is no charge to join the X community. We want to help you on your journey and to make it a good one. So with that, Danielle, I'd love to turn things over to you and Dr. McFadden.
Great. Thank you, Todd, and welcome, Dr. McFadden. Thank you so much for taking the time. And yeah, I'm just gonna kind of ask you questions about, your studies, like how you came to be interested in this, and yeah, and I guess first of all, I'll start out with, how do you define spirituality?
Well, spirituality means a lot of different things to many different people. And so to give a precise definition is a challenge. And if you look it up in the dictionary, they say one thing, other articles that I read have another definition. But I came across one that I think is fairly meaningful, and that is spirituality or spiritual well-being is a state of mind, a constant awareness of a higher power and the way one relates to that higher power. Now, that sounds a lot like AA, I know, but the idea of a spiritual well-being, I think, makes a lot of sense. And so that's the definition I chose. To me, it sounded most appropriate.
Mhm. And how is that definition different from religion? Like how do you kind of like differentiate those two?
That's a good question. The issue is that there's a lot of overlap between spirituality and religiosity and the idea of religion. Of course, religion is also more focused on an organized denomination with rules, laws, and doctrines that according to a belief system. But certainly spirituality is an umbrella in which religiosity fits into. And when you talk a little later about addiction programs and how spirituality interfaces with addiction, the logical program we always look at as AA, they claim that they're a spiritual program. And if you read the 12 steps, nobody would disagree. It's all about spirituality, but they claim they're not a religious body. And so I think there is a reason to try to separate the two.
Mhm.
And so spirituality is more of a generic term in many ways, but psychologists have also looked at this, and the psychologists define spirituality as an individual a characteristic of individuals and a multidimensional construct like personality or health. They define religion as a social phenomenon defined by particular boundaries such as belief, practice, and membership. So there is a difference. There's a narrower focus when we talk about religion versus spirituality, although religion and religiosity fits under the umbrella of spirituality.
Oh, okay. So yeah, spirituality is kind of, I guess, like more all-encompassing, and then religion can be
Yes.
like a little more like narrowly focused.
Right.
Okay. And how did you come to be interested in that connection between spirituality and then someone starting like their quit journey, like quitting from tobacco?
Well, I have to tell you a little bit about my background. I've been interested in smoking cessation programs all my career, ever since I was in residency until the time I came here to Mayo Clinic 20 years ago. And it's primarily based on my own spiritual experience. And I do belong to a Christian church that promotes health promotion very strongly, and it has developed their own church-based smoking cessation programs. And so I was able to participate in those for years before I ever came to Mayo Clinic. And so I've been interested in tobacco cessation treatment for years. When I did my public health degree, we conducted a number of programs in California. And so I've been interested in the topic. And when I first came here and I expressed my interest immediately, Dr. Hayes and Dr. Hurt and Dr. Ebert in our nicotine dependence clinic and welcomed me to kind of join the staff and be part of the program here.
Oh, nice. And were there any like challenges that you faced when you were talking about kind of the connections between spirituality and quitting, or like were there people who were kind of doubting you, or like were people kind of like right away thinking, oh, like there is a connection, like oh, like
Yeah.
we need to incorporate that?
Well, the way we approach it is that spirituality is one of the adjuncts that can be helpful in substance abuse and addiction. We're not claiming that spirituality is the whole program, but as you know, when we look at addiction, there are multiple treatment modalities that are helpful. We talk about the addiction, the neurotransmitters, and all of the physiologic pathways for addiction, and yet when we look at many of the smokers and people that are addicted to nicotine, there's an element of shame, of guilt, of remorse, of depression. And I think that's an area where spirituality can have a lot of input and a lot of, and can be helpful in dealing with the patient's or with the smoker's emotional state.
Mm-hmm. And can you talk a little bit more about that? Just like that specific role that spirituality can play as someone is working to quit tobacco?
That's a good question. I think there's been some research done on that, and basically attitude, the smoker's attitude, depending on how positive their attitude is, their likelihood of success is increased. Now, has there been a lot of research on using spirituality alone for substance abuse? Outside of AA, I would say no. And there's a lot more opportunity to do that. We need to do more research on spirituality and smoking cessation and other substance abuse. But due to the fact that, with the emotional state of most smokers, they often feel hopeless. They feel like there's nothing they can do to get over this addiction. And anything we can do to give them hope, and depending on a higher power, however they may see that higher power. And I think it's important to keep it generic. We don't want to, offend anybody by saying, you got to follow this religion or that religion. But, higher power is however they see it, can be helpful in dealing with their feelings of guilt and shame. And then we know that there was a study I read about recently in lung cancer survivors who were smokers, and they noted that those who had a higher spiritual index actually did better because of their improved mental health status and decreased depression.
And so,
I think that's the relationship.
oh, okay. And are there any specific aspects of spirituality that have been found to be effective at helping people with quitting? So I know like you're talking about how spirituality can help with those feelings of like guilt or shame or depression.
Yeah.
So are there like specific practices that people can do?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know that there's been research done on a specific aspect of spirituality. I will mention briefly a survey that we did here at Mayo Clinic with my colleague, Dr. Krogan. I don't know if she was going to join the chat here a little later, but anyway, here I wanted to do a survey on the relationship between spirituality and tobacco dependence. So we did a very simple cross-sectional survey, and what we did is we the goal was to assess the potential impact of spirituality on tobacco use. And we surveyed, it was a 27-question survey on patients that were waiting in the waiting area to be seen for other medical problems. It took about 15 minutes to complete, and we invited all the people, whether they were a smoker or non-smoker, to complete this. Over a period of 3 months, we got over 500 people, and about a third of them were smokers. And the way we assessed their spirituality is we used a well-defined tool called the Durrell, Durel, that measures spirituality. It's developed by Duke University. And what it did was it helped us look at such issues as, Bible reading, prayer, church attendance, their feeling of spirituality importance. And what we found out was quite interesting that there were 370 non-smokers, there was 131 smokers, and compared to smokers, non-smokers more often participated in religious activities such as regular weekly church attendance, daily prayer, and Bible study, and about twice as much, like 49% versus 27%. And those who were current smokers did not have nearly the religious activity levels as those who were non-smokers or even ex-smokers. So that was an interesting study. I thought to myself, I wonder if there are other such studies. And when I did a literature review, there are numerous studies that show this inverse relationship between religiosity, spirituality, and substance abuse, whether it be tobacco or other substance abuse. So I think that's a pretty strong, multiple different studies showed this. There was a study that showed it in pregnant women. Another study showed it in people over the age of 65. Another one showed it in people that were lung cancer survivors. So I think it's a pretty strong indication from multiple different studies that there's an inverse relationship between spirituality, tobacco use, and other substance abuse.
Yeah, you kind of already answered another question I had about like what kind of research has been done. So that's really fascinating that there's like this whole host of research that's like specifically about how spirituality or having a spiritual practice can relate to all kinds of substance abuse, like not just like tobacco use. So like that's
Right.
really
There's a lot more we really need to do more research and look, like you say, what's the specific aspects of spirituality that seem to be helpful. I don't know that we can identify that even in the AA because there's a pretty broad spectrum of their 12-step program.
mm-hmm. And also well, I guess this kind of depends on the specific person, but how would one establish a spiritual practice?
I think that's a good question. I think, for smokers who are interested in quitting, just like AA, we have NA, Nicotine Anonymous, that uses a 12-step program. And, I regard that type of approach very highly because it deals with spirituality in a non-threatening, non-offensive way. And that's certainly one way to do it. Other ways to do it is working with a church-affiliated program, where prayer is often offered as part of the program. And other ways is connecting with counselors that have a spiritual background as well. But, you're right. It's an individual decision, and whatever works for one person may not be, what's going to work for everybody. So I think one has to individualize, one's idea on how to approach that.
Mm-hmm. And, well, yeah, I guess that also, yeah, that kind of answers the next question that I had too. So, just like kind of recommendations that you have for incorporating spirituality as someone's like in like their quit journey.
Right.
Yeah, so I guess it really just depends on, yeah, just like the individual, like what makes the most sense for each individual.
I might just point out one interesting article that I read that spiritual well-being, there was a study done among African American women, and they found that spiritual well-being as a coping resource was quite effective, more effective in many ways among African women, among African American women than among white women. So, and there are other ethnic groups where spiritual well-being may be more important as well. Some among the Hispanics and some other ethnic groups where spiritual well-being is extremely important.
And well, those were the questions that I had for you. If anyone had any questions that they'd like to put in the chat or
yeah, welcome any comments. This is,
like
I don't have a corner on the market on this particular topic. It's quite broad and it's quite, what should I say? The research on it has been not extensive at all. I hope that we have opportunity to do more research. I think it has a potential for being a real important component of addiction treatment, not only for tobacco, but also for alcohol and other substance abuse.
We have continued to have people jump into the meeting here along the way, so there may be opportunity to repeat some past points. But I did put together a brief poll that I could launch, very informal, very unscientific, about the role of spirituality in your quit that I can put up here on the screen for a few minutes. And then I believe one of our participants was asking if she can make a comment. I don't know, Julie, if you wish to do that on screen or on audio, or if you want to do that in the chat. Either one is
I don't mind.
Wide open.
I can do it right here now.
Wonderful.
Hello, everybody. As a long-term member of X, I have found that many of the membership have a higher spiritual. They are more able to quit, and they rely on that spiritual higher power in order to help them do so. I know that for me, although I was not a very strong Christian at the time, I quit for Lent, and it enabled me to take a 40-day period. But I couldn't have done it on my own auspices. I had to reach to a higher place for help. And I found that a lot of people on X also have that ability to call on a higher power to maintain their quit and to help them quit in the process.
Sure. Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. A lot of people have found help through depending on a higher power, spiritual power.
Getting some nice responses on the poll here so far. Is it visible to everyone, or am I the only one seeing it?
I saw it.
I can see it.
You should be seeing the updated results here coming through. We've had about 61% of everybody respond to it so far, and as you can see, it's either critically or a very important part of the quit journey for the people on the call here today. While we're waiting for that poll to finish, I'll give it just another minute here. I did see there was another comment from the chat from Susie. Susie, do you just want to keep that on chat, or you're welcome to chime in on audio if you wish as well? Okay. Well,
I can see the question.
Oh, great. Yeah.
It says, I'm interested in studies who are committed Christians who are successful in quitting nicotine due to their faith. I would be interested in that too, Susie. I think that would be excellent to look at. Unfortunately, I don't have any reference to you. Anybody else on the program here have any studies that have looked at Christians who were successful in quitting? And you said only what has worked for me. Yeah, every person has an individual experience, but by and large, my impression has been when we introduce a spiritual component to a program, it's usually been well received. And even sometimes, I know I've been involved in church related programs where at the end of the smoking cessation class, each session, we will offer prayer, and most people appreciate that.
Does anyone else have any more questions? or comments as well, like that. Comments and questions are all welcome.
One of our participants added the comment, for me, spirituality was essential to dealing with the shame of being a smoker and getting beyond it.
Absolutely. That's a very, very common sentiment and feeling of many smokers, the guilt and the shame and, letting family down. And the idea that, you can approach it with a higher power, that in some ways you feel a sense of forgiveness and starting over again and, kind of setting the slate clean again, can be a huge positive factor in not only quitting, but in remaining abstinent.
In getting ready for today's session, I was trying to see if there was some other literature out there. There was a 2021 systematic review of religiosity and its relationship with smoking cessation in the Medical Journal of Malaysia. But it looked like most of the studies that were reviewed were from the United States, and they found that 11 out of the 14 studies found a positive relationship between religiosity and smoking cessation success.
Oh, I'm not surprised.
Have you seen a difference in like different cultures? Like have you seen more or less success like depending on like what what like cultural norms are, or is it kind of like just like across the board, like this is something that is helped?
I think, Danielle, that there are some differences and there are some similarities. I mean, the whole pathophysiology of nicotine addiction, I think, is across the board, no matter what culture you come from. I had the opportunity years before I came to Mayo to live and work in Asia. I was in Taiwan and Singapore and later in China. And in China, the tobacco use prevalence is very, very high. It's improving. It's improving, but the the culture there is different because it was so widely accepted. Not only was it accepted, to smoke in public, but it was a tradition there. It was a courtesy. If you met a stranger and you were getting acquainted with somebody, the thing that you would often do is offer them a cigarette. That was just the courtesy. And I'll never forget one day a patient walked in and I was going to see him for something else, and he immediately offered me a cigarette, and I was abhorred. I couldn't believe it. But then you have to understand the culture they're coming from. And I mean, things have really changed. And things have improved there, and smoking rates have decreased. But cultural differences are a huge issue.
Oh, I see. Amy has her hand up.
And sort of a comment question. Just interestingly, I'm someone who stopped drinking with using AA almost 14 years. And when I stopped drinking, I started smoking. After 15 years of not smoking, I picked up cigarettes because it was the only thing available at the detox. I can't believe it. So anyway, then unfortunately vaping became a very easy way to get nicotine secretly and no odor, and I have children and everything, and I've just finally got myself back on just the nicotine mints, but it just seems like it's been a lot harder to use the spiritual tools with nicotine than it seemed to be with alcohol. I just from experience, I wish I could just turn on those spiritual tools and just make them work every time. But there is something with nicotine that really, one more comment and then I'll be quiet, is I think what it does that's unique is I'll be nicotine free for 3 months and then it'll call me really strongly to come back. Like these waves of intense feelings after some abstaining that I never seem to ever see with alcohol. Once I was done with it, I was done with it. But now with nicotine, it keeps calling me back.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing your experience, Amy. I think what you pointed out is the fact that nicotine is one of the most addictive chemicals of all the substances that are used. And unfortunately, it's not prohibited, except in public places, um, to use it, whether it's vaping or smoking. And you're right that AA for Alcohol Anonymous has been very successful, very popular. But if you compare the numbers of how many people have joined Nicotine Anonymous, it's far, far fewer. And I'm not entirely sure why that's true, because they use some of the same principles and, the use of a high, incorporation of a higher power. But, and the cravings, like you say, it can come back 3 months, 6 months, a year later. And that's where I think your previous dependence on a higher power, just relating back to the AA experience, may be helpful. But it is a challenge. There's no doubt about it. And vaping, unfortunately, has taken over. It is most young people now don't smoke cigarettes. It's been more of a vaping issue among the younger population and even the older population, for that means. But it's a challenge.
Danielle, we had another comment from the chat. It says,
Oh, yeah.
I began attending church when I started my quit journey a year ago. It's helped me find a new community where I felt alone this past year without having my, quote, best friend with me.
That's wonderful. And that's true that a church community or, socialization with people who have a positive attitude, who have an experience, a spiritual experience, so to speak, can be very helpful, because many of those people are willing to reach out and support, your path to abstinence. So that's an excellent way to deal with it.
Actually, I had another question for you, Dr. McFadden.
Sure.
Have you noticed a difference in like age groups as far as like spirituality and quitting? Like, have you noticed like younger people, like do they kind of glom onto it more or less, or do older people glom onto it more or less? Like, have you seen differences there?
I can't say with certainty that there's a major difference. I do think that in general, older people by tradition have been attached sometime in their past to a religious organization more than younger people coming out where there's more secularism. And although I don't know that younger people don't feel the need or the necessity of a higher power, they tend to steer away from what they consider confining religious organizations. And so, but I think the concept of higher power, and I applaud AA for going that approach, claiming they're a spiritual program, but not a religious program, because that idea of religious program somehow is a barrier for many people when they want to join an organization.
Oh, and then there's another comment in the chat. Let's see. I really want to say that I am so thankful to be almost 2 years nicotine free after more than 60 years of chain smoking. I promised Jesus I would never smoke another cigarette, and that has been the key for me.
Wonderful, wonderful. So what your comment has been echoed by many others who have gone through the same process, where they've had a religious experience where the higher power has been very personal to them and has kept them tobacco free. And I think that's an excellent approach, because not only spirituality is important in the quitting process, it's important in remaining smoke free. And that's why, I think one of the successes of AA has been, I've attended several AA meetings, and I'm amazed to walk in there and somebody say, I'm Joe Blow, I'm an alcoholic, and ask them, when's the last time you had a drink? 20 years ago. And I'm saying, wait a minute, So the vulnerability that they're expressing, and depending on that higher power day by day, and they talk about taking one day at a time, and sometimes that's what it takes.
Mm-hmm. And that was from CZ411. You had that comment. So, yeah. Thank you for your comment, and congratulations on being almost 2 years nicotine free. That's amazing.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I want to congratulate both of you for joining this seminar, and we wish that you will be able to find a method and experience that will be successful, but it does take sometimes weeks or years to really have a final, success. So I think, taking it one day at a time, setting the quit date is certainly a step in the right direction. And I think, looking for the source of a higher power, working with people who have quit and, trying to get their support as well. And, here at Mayo, we do use pharmacotherapy quite widely, and I don't have anything against that. But I do think adding the spiritual dimension can be a real help. And so you've had experience with AA, go back to the 12 steps, and maybe even consider, joining Nicotine Anonymous, which is also a 12-step program. Now, it's interesting. I looked up on the website Nicotine Anonymous to see where the programs were. In the state of Minnesota, I think there are 3 places. The whole state, maybe more than that, but that's all I could find. Now, they have dozens of online programs, online groups. So, but there's a lot of a lot of opportunity there. If you had a positive experience with AA, I would consider, look at NA and see what that could be. But I agree that nicotine addiction, I've heard it again and again from people that have been addicted to both alcohol and nicotine, that the nicotine is a harder one to deal with.
I would like to mention one of our members here who runs the faith and spirituality group on the X community had mentioned, we've actually been talking about doing a name change. The faith and spirituality group has been primarily a Christian centric group over the years that it's been around, and so we're actually going to change it to more accurately reflect that. It's going to be called Christian Quitters. And then we are going to provision another group for more general discussions about faith and spirituality that will give a separate name and separate management. So I am curious, anyone on the call, if you are not of a Christian persuasion, if you have a different faith, religiosity, mysticism, spiritual set of beliefs, and would be interested in that group, I would love to hear from you. If you want to message in the chat here or within the community, if you want to message the community admin handle that both Danielle and I keep an eye on. So again, we want to make sure that the kinds of platforms and spaces that we hold for quit journeys and all the different kinds of quit journeys are reflective of the needs of the people in the space. So happy to announce that we're going to be making that change here pretty shortly.
I think that's a great opportunity, really. And I would encourage those of you who have an interest in spirituality to consider joining.
I'm Sherry again. And, NA typically refers to Narcotics Anonymous. So
yeah, there's a Nicotine Anonymous too.
Right. So are there Zoom meetings that I can find easily that are all directed to nicotine? I mean, what would I Google in order to find a Zoom meeting that deals primarily with nicotine addiction rather than Narcotics Anonymous?
I don't know. When I Zoomed it the other day, there was programs that they mentioned all over the U.S. and some
It's called
other
Nick
places.
A. It actually, instead of NA, it's called Nick A.
Nick A. Right. I'm sorry. Nick A. You're right. Thank you, Amy.
NIC?
Oh yes, NIC.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thanks for that clarification.
For what it's worth, yes, they do have Zoom meetings, and also I highly recommend their literature. If you don't even bother with their meetings, they have a step workbook that really you can do on your own. You don't necessarily even need the meetings to do step work. In this case, you could do Nick A step work alone, even though it's not advised. You could. And if it's what gets you started, I don't think it's a bad first step.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and actually, Dr. McFadden, I had one last question for you.
Sure.
Um, was there has there been anything that's surprised you in the research that you've done over the years about on spirituality and quitting? Yeah, just like anything that's like kind of jumped out at you, like, oh, I wasn't expecting to see that, or yeah, just like anything like that.
Well, I think the most important aspect, like I mentioned early on in our discussion, was the inverse relationship between spiritual beliefs and religiosity and prevalence of smoking, which to me says something. Now, there's a lot of confounders here. Some churches prohibit smoking, so you can't be part of that religious group if you're a smoker. But at the same time, that got me to thinking there must be something behind the higher power concept that is keeping people on a healthy lifestyle and prohibiting and keeping them from smoking or helping them to quit, because a lot of these people are ex-smokers that were able to quit. So I think that was one of the most striking things that I noticed, and it wasn't only in my survey. There's multiple surveys out there that show the same thing. Yeah, so that was a surprising thing to me.
And I think we're coming up on the end of this webinar, but did anyone have any other final questions, any other final thoughts that they wanted to share? And also just thank you all for being here. Like this has been, and thank you, Dr. McFadden. Like this has been a really great conversation. And yeah, just thankful for everyone being a part of it.
I want to thank each one of you for joining and for your comments. Listening to you, I've learned more as well about this topic, and I will continue to pay attention to how this progresses. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, again, thank you everyone for attending today's webinar on faith and spirituality and quitting. And stay tuned for more events in this webinar series. We're trying to do one of these every couple of months. And this is part of the broader series on the topic of quitting and identity. And so as we start sharing some of these expert views and having these great open conversations, we hope you'll continue to join us for these. And we'll hope to post the highlights from this conversation up in the community as well. If you are not currently part of the X community, we would welcome you to join us. It is free to join at becomeanx.org, and you can pop in and engage in more of these conversations, get wonderful support from others who have been where you are, and hopefully help you along your way. And with that, we'll go ahead and close out the day here. Thank you for making a part of your day with us. And Danielle, Dr. McFadden, thank you both for your insights and wisdoms and great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a great day, everyone.